Welcome back everyone to a new video this week. In this video we're going to go over all the books that I've read so far this year in 2023. Now I read about 8 books and I know that's not a lot, but as I mentioned in my previous video, I'm trying to get back into reading, and so hopefully as the year continues on I'll read more books. One of the 8 books that I read is quite possibly one of the worst books I've ever read, so stay tuned until the end of this video to see my review of this book. So the first book I read was Call Me Maybe by Cara Bastione. Now this book is an Audible original. So the premise of this book, we have Vera and Cal. Vera owns a website through Squarespace. I know it's not Squarespace, I just forget what the name of the contract vendor for the website is. So she owns this website and Cal works in customer service. And so Vera calls up customer service one day because she's having issues with her website. So when she gets connected with Cal figures out that there are some serious technical issues that are going on with her website that's going to take longer for him to fix on just one phone call. So they stay on the phone talking to each other for the course of a couple days. I think it might have been a couple weeks. Throughout them just talking on the phone, they start to fall in love with each other. Now this book kind of seems a bit insta-lovey, but because the production value of this book was kind of high, I thought it was just okay. The person that was doing the voice acting for Cal did a good job, but the person doing the voice acting for Vera did kind of a really bad job. So because of that, and because the book was kind of insta-lovey, I ended up giving it 2 stars. Next book I read was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. Now this book is kind of a Regency romance type of book, kind of in the same vein of Bridgerton. So we have our main character Theodora. When she was young, she got attacked by a fairy and the fairy took half of her soul. Her cousin Vanessa saved Theodora from having her entire soul taken away. And so because Dora has only half her soul, her feelings are kind of muted in areas where she's supposed to be happy or when she's supposed to be crying. She really doesn't. So this tends to her getting into trouble sometimes because she can't pick up on social cues and she can't read the room very well. But it's that time of the year when all the ladies of age head to London to try to find a match. So we have Dora and Vanessa. They went to London, and in London Vanessa meets the sorcerer. So he's kind of this magic-y guy, kind of like a wizard or whatever. And she asks him to help Dora get the rest of her soul back. And from there, Dora and the sorcerer fall in love. Now, I did really like this book. This book was quite funny just because of the way that sometimes when Dora couldn't read the room, so she ended up getting herself in trouble. And I thought this book was really funny. I will be continuing on with the rest of this book. I think the next one is called 1,000 Stitches or something like that. I'm giving this book 4 stars, and I said before, I'm going to continue on with this series, and I hope the rest of the books are just as good as Half a Soul. The next book I read was Passengers by John Mars. This one I listened to on audio. I don't think I mentioned it before, but I read Half a Soul physically, so that's probably why I ended up giving it such a high rating, was because I wasn't listening to it on audio. And so for the Passengers with John Mars, the audiobook had a full cast of characters, a full cast of voice actors, which I really like that in my audiobooks because I tend to like an audiobook more if it has a full cast of characters. Passengers is based in the not too distant future where cars are self-driving, and so we have 8 passengers that get into the self-driving cars, and once they get in they realize that the car has been hacked, and so the hacker that took over the car says that all the 8 cars are going to come together and they're going to collide at the end of the day. So this, as I mentioned before, was read kind of like a Black Mirror episode, which I really like Black Mirror, which is probably why I really like this book. Now this book had a really good plot twist at the end of it that I didn't see coming. I'm really bad at guessing plot twists. This was the one case, or one of the very few cases, where because of the audio I ended up liking the book more. I ended up giving this book about 4 stars. The next book I read was Little Secrets by Jennifer Hillier. So now this book is based out of, I think, somewhere on the West Coast. I want to say Oregon, but that might not be right. Maybe it might be California. I don't know. But we have our main character, I forget what her name is, and she has a little son about 3 years old. And so they're at this farmer's market. I want to say it's a farmer's market. I forget the setting of this entire book, but let's just pretend that they're at a farmer's market. And so they're there. Her husband calls her. So in between the time of her picking up her phone and then with her little son, she lets go of her little son's hand. And then within that split second, her son goes missing. So they end up calling the police, and the police comes and they're not able to find any trace of the little boy. So then we flash forward a year later, and our main character and her husband are having troubles in their marriage because of the kidnapping or the disappearance of their little boy. And so our main character hires a private investigator because at this point the case has gone cold. And so the private investigator she hires is meant to look into the case. But along looking into the case, the private investigator finds out that our main character's husband is cheating on her, and she relays that information to the lady. So with that, our main character, she's like, well, I've lost my son, and now my husband is cheating on me. Oh, hell no. So from there, the story kind of just takes off. Listen to this on audio, and the narration for this audiobook was actually very good. So I did end up liking this book, and it had a really good plot twist at the end as well. And I gave this book 4 stars. The next book I read was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Now this book has been all over the internets, and so I decided to pick it up. So this book goes through Jeanette McCurdy's childhood and her abuse that she suffered through her mom. So her time as a child actor up until she was done with her time on iCarly. And I never watched iCarly growing up, so I don't really know like Jeanette's character on iCarly. This book was very dark because, as Jeanette explains in the book, she suffered from abuse from her mom, she suffered from eating disorder, she suffered from OCD, I think it was. And so I feel like this book should have came with a lot of trigger warning because I mentioned it was very dark. So if you could be triggered by any of those things, I don't recommend you reading this book. My other issue with this book is that so Jeanette did the narration of this one, and she spoke sometimes I feel like just a little bit too fast, and I found myself like turning down the speed of the audiobook because she would say something and I would completely miss what she said. Overall, I did thought that this book was really good, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. The next book I read was Spare by Prince Harry. Now this book is another one that was all over social media. I also listened to this one on audio, and it was narrated by Prince Harry, and I think that him narrating it actually helped. So this book goes through the time in his royal family since he was a child up until when he I think the birth of his second daughter, and it goes throughout his meeting Meghan. This book really gave some insight on what it's like to be a member of the royal family, and you could really tell in this book that prior to meeting Meghan, he really struggled with who he was as a person and what his like place was within the royal family. But it felt like once he met Meghan, he really came into his own. And I think that because this book was narrated by Prince Harry, it really lended to me like liking the book, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really like this book. I know that this book was really controversial when it came out, but I feel like without reading the entire book and having all the context, I know you could, read the, like little sound bites on the internet and go, wow, that's really scandalous or really controversial. But I really recommend reading this entire book to get the full picture. The next book I read is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Now I have read an Emily Henry book before. I think it was, what was it? I think Bee Tree, that was the one that I read by her. And I did like that book. I can't remember at the end of that book if it had I don't think the main character at the end of that book ended up getting together or whatever, but I think that Emily Henry's like romance novels are kind of usually just based in some kind of reality. I don't tend to like romance novels because I find them all a bit like insta-lovey or unrealistic. But People We Meet on Vacation are based on these 2 characters I think they met in college, and they went on a bunch of vacations together, and something happened on one vacation that they took together, and they ended up having a falling out, and they hadn't spoken in 2 years. But then our main female protagonist, she comes up with some kind of like funny excuse for her and the main male protagonist to go on a vacation together one more time. And quite honestly, I really don't remember a lot about what happened in this book. I listened to it on audio. I thought the audio narration was just okay. And if you asked me to recite the entirety of what happened in this book, I could not tell you. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I remember like bits and pieces of this book, but this book's biggest sin was just being boring. I'm sorry. It was boring. But again, I thought it was just okay. I gave it 3 stars, but now that I'm kind of thinking back on this, I probably should have given it 2 stars. Now, the last book I read so far is the Bromance Book Club. This book is about a group of men that read Regency romance novels in order to fix their relationship with their wives. So, like it said, it's a bromance book club, and so all the guys within this book club are baseball players, like Major League Baseball players, who at one point had an issue or some kind of problem with their wife, that when they entered the book club, reading the books helped them resolve the issues that they were having with their wives. So, by the way, I'm just going to spoil the entirety of this book because I hated it so much. So if you don't want to know the plot of this book, or if you're just here to hate on this book with me, please stick around. So we have our main character, Gavin, who at the start of this book, him and his wife, Thea, had an argument. So the premise of it is that him and Gavin have been married for 3 years, and so Thea one day tells Gavin that in the 3 years that they've been married, he has never been able to help her finish in bed. So Gavin kind of loses his shit because I guess that's a huge ego hit to a man, and so Thea tells him to leave, to get out, and so Gavin goes and he does that. Gavin, once he's all cooled down, he goes and tells the other male baseball players of what was going on with his wife, and so the other baseball players let him into the book club and basically are like, here, read these Regency romance novels. They'll help you, give you like advice on how to fix your relationship with your wife. So Gavin goes to his wife Thea and begs her to give him a second chance, which she says she will do and promises until Christmas. If things aren't fixed within their marriage, they're going to get a divorce. So now the problem is that Thea has no intention of making good on this deal. And it's stated like that plenty of times in this book, that she has no intention to make good on this deal. And so throughout this book, we have Gavin, who is trying his hardest to get back into Thea's good graces, but Thea is just like literally not having it. Thea is just kind of a monster. So in the beginning of the book, when I told you that they're having this fight over, their pretty much their sex lives, that Thea asks Gavin, to leave, and Gavin does this. So he actually leaves, and so Thea hangs it over his head pretty much the entire book, saying like, oh, you left me. And Gavin was like, well, you asked me to leave. And so then Thea's like, well, that was a test. And so in my head, I'm thinking, how is he supposed to know that that was a test? First of all, you don't test your significant other. That's just wrong and rude. He's not a mind reader. He's not supposed to know he's being tested right now. Gavin and Thea have 2 twin daughters, and that she fell pregnant within a couple months of them dating. So because she got pregnant, they decided to get married, and the book tells us several times that Gavin's parents thought that Thea was trying to trap Gavin into a marriage by being pregnant, because once she got pregnant, Gavin got called up to the majors, and obviously as a Major League Baseball player, he's gonna make a lot of money. And so Gavin's parents was concerned about that. And just in my opinion, just because one person falls pregnant doesn't mean that you necessarily need to get married right away. It doesn't. You need to take the time to get to know each other and know that you guys are both a good match for each other. And honestly, throughout reading this book, I could not tell why Gavin liked Thea that much. Thea had 0 redeeming qualities, whereas Gavin had a lot of redeeming qualities. Like you could tell like he really loved Thea for what reason, I don't know, but he really, really, really wanted to get back in good with his wife. And throughout the book, Thea just keeps picking fights with him. Like I mentioned, like she had no intention to make good on this deal for them to get back together. So she just kept picking fights, and she just kept drilling it into Gavin how much she wanted to get a divorce. There was this one scene when Gavin and Thea went over to another baseball player's home for Thanksgiving, and they ran into like this one baseball player wife who Thea like absolutely could not stand, and they had issues with. And I kind of get that. This lady was a little bit insufferable, and so this lady was like straight up rude in front of Thea, and Gavin looks over to Thea and he's like, is she always like that? And Thea's like, yeah, you're just supposed to know how people treat me. And I'm sorry, but is Gavin supposed to be a mind reader? Is he supposed to know how you're feeling? He can't, like, you have to express that to him. That was my other issue with this book, is that they've been married for 3 years, and in the 3 years that they've been married, Thea hadn't once been honest with him about how she's feeling, because Thea keeps saying within the book, I'm gonna do what I actually want right now, I'm tired of holding it all in, blah blah blah. She should have, like, I feel like that's your problem, honey. You should be honest and upfront with your partner. Like, things don't work without honesty in a relationship. I cannot believe that this book had me rooting for men in 2023. Like, I was rooting for Gavin here, not for him to get back with his wife. I was rooting for him and Thea to actually get a divorce. Like, Gavin just needed a new wife altogether. And the other issue I had with this book is Thea's sister Liv. Now, Liv was also quite insufferable, just like Thea. Like, she would also pick fights with Gavin. So in the time between Gavin and Thea trying to work on their relationship, Gavin was living in the guest house of their home. So one day, Liv decides to go into the guest house and take a little snoop around Gavin's belongings, which is like, first of all, girl, why are you in there? You don't belong in there. You don't actually, like, Liv lives at the house and takes care of the twin sisters together, but like snooping, that's just kind of a no. Like, I feel like she crossed a line there. And so Liv finds the Regency romance novels that Gavin has been reading, and she goes and tattles on Gavin to her sister Thea. And then Thea kind of loses her shit, because she's like, oh, you've been lying to me the whole time. All these like things that you've been saying to get back in my good graces, you found out in these books, like, you've been lying to me. And then towards the end of the book, it gets even worse, because we find out that Thea has daddy issues that she pretty much hid from Gavin throughout the entirety of their marriage. Found out that Thea's dad left her and Liv when they were kids, so Thea has this fear of Gavin leaving her. So when Thea asks Gavin to like leave the night they had their argument, and he does, in her mind, in Thea's mind, she's thinking, well, Gavin's just like my dad. And so, like I mentioned, Thea didn't tell anything about her relationship with her dad to Gavin the entire time they were married. So I would just say that Thea is absolutely insufferable. I would not recommend reading this book. It was so bad. It is, if you can't tell at this point, it is a 1-star book for me. I will not be picking up the rest of this book series at all. That's it. That's all the books that I read so far in 2023. I will continue to be reading more. Actually, I read a couple more books since I started filming this, so we'll catch up in my next video that I'm going to post. And I just want to say thank you guys for watching, and have a nice day.